All right. On today's episode, we interviewed Lexi Grant, where we talked about how do you transition from journalism to essentially creating your own company, right? Having two exits and then moving on and helping sellers kind of learn more about their business and industries. And really, what are a lot of tips to give founders in terms of mistakes made and how do they start to position their business for an exit? So, Casey, what were some of your takeaways?
When you get into selling your company, right? It's usually for most people, it's going to be the biggest sale that they've ever made in their time. With their heart, their soul, and their business. And being able to get data to be able to help you make a better decision, it really is priceless in a lot of ways. And so not only is Lexi a entrepreneur who has had two exits, she had rolled in equity into a company, and then that company had an exit at a later date. She's now back building a business that's focused around giving data to people that are looking to sell these online businesses. So to me, it's just an incredible value add for somebody that's really sitting out there going, hey, I have an online business. I want to sell. Where do I get data for this?
Yeah, absolutely. And we all learn from seeing from others, right? And so seeing what others have exited, seeing how they positioned, all those things kind of go into making a successful transaction. And I think, this episode, we also really talked about some of the mistakes sellers make, right? Like if I want to sell, it's not, hey, today I'm going to decide I'm going to sell and tomorrow I'm going to sell, right? It's really, I need to be way ahead of it, right? Yeah. I'm going to sell. Okay. And a year from now, I'll be ready. So what are the steps I need to make between now and then to kind of get myself geared up and positioned? And like kind of Lexi alludes to, right? She's talked to a lot of sellers. She's seen kind of consistencies in terms of what they do and what they don't do, and how do they kind of avoid those landfall, those mines to kind of have a successful exit.
Yeah, have that package ready to go.
Cool. All right, well, we'll go ahead and hop into it. Hey, Lexi, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Excited to have you on board. So for our listeners, you want to give a little bit of background about yourself and kind of what you're currently doing?
Sure. My background is in building media businesses, and I sold two of them over the last decade.
Congrats.
And thanks. And during that process, I felt like there wasn't a lot of resources to help founders like me. And like me, I mean, you're making a 6, 7, or even a low 8-figure sale. It felt like all of the success stories I was seeing and all the resources out there felt like they were aimed at much, much bigger sales. So 2.5 years ago, I launched They Got Acquired. And that's the business I'm running now. It's a media company first with a data arm. And our mission is really to help founders sell their business. So I consider us a bridge between founders who want to sell, but really don't know where to start and don't understand the process and need to learn about it and educate themselves, and the M&A world, which can be intimidating sometimes for founders the first time they go through it.
Speaking of intimidating, then maybe I think you got your start as a journalist, right? Actually here in our backyard in the Houston Chronicle.
Yeah.
What gave you that confidence to kind of make that leap and actually start a media company, right? Because most journalists don't have that kind of spirit. And so what was that segue to get you started there?
It's funny because I never thought that I would run a business. And in fact, to this day, I wish I took more business classes and courses or in business classes in college. I never did that. But I took a sabbatical after I'd been in the workforce for a few years, and I traveled around Africa, and I came home and I was writing a book about it, and I needed to make money while I was looking for a job. And so I just started freelancing. And the first business that I ran was a social media agency. And this was in like 2010. So it was when it was just kind of getting more popular and people were looking for help with that. So I think like many entrepreneurs, I stumbled into it out of necessity and looking for something fun and interesting and different, and just grew from there.
Got it. And what did that first company do?
It was a social media agency. So, and actually it very quickly pivoted into more content marketing generally. So again, this is in the 2010s, but we ran blogs for businesses. So there's a lot of businesses at that time that wanted to have a blog, but they didn't know how to do it or how to get people to come to that blog. So we would run them for businesses.
That's great. And how long did you run that first company?
I ran it for about 5 years, and that was the first sale that I made. So that company was an acqui-hire, but we were purchased by one of our clients. So we ran the content for a media company called The Penny Hoarder. It's a personal finance media brand. And after we'd worked together for about 1.5 years, the founder asked if he could bring myself and my team in-house there, as he was kind of, blowing up the business and growing it much bigger.
How exciting.
Yeah, no, I remember blogging was the thing in 2010 because my background's actually, I would say, development in the web world. And so I was super deep into it. And, and it's interesting to see what all of the AI kind of content writing stuff that's there now and how you can kind of quasi automate that and get that kind of generation that some people were looking for. But maybe, dive into that a little bit. So how big did you grow it? So 5 years, right? You grew it. Then kind of a year and a half into a relationship with the customer, they ended up acquiring you. How many people was it? What were revenues and kind of what was that acquisition like?
Yeah. Well, I still didn't have any employees. They were all contractors working for me. And I was at the point where I had a few of the contractors working full time. So I was having conversations around like, do I want to have employees? Like, what do I want this business to look like? And I'm trying to think, it feels like so long ago now. And I don't talk about the specifics about it that often, but yeah, when I went in-house, it was myself and I think 5 other folks from the team came. They had been contractors for me, but they joined as full-time employees. And we scaled the business really quickly. That was a great education for me because that was my first time really helping heavily with the operations of scaling a startup. And we grew it to something much bigger than I would have done on my own. That business, the penny hoarder, it sold for $100 million a couple of years ago. And it was a bootstrap business. Which is one of the reasons why I agreed to go in because I felt like we'd have a lot of autonomy growing the business. I was a second employee. So it was a great experience. It was again, something I wouldn't have done on my own and I got to learn a lot through it.
That is fantastic. So the way that it worked, so your media company was acquired by a group and then that company then had a second exit. Is that what happened? That company exited or?
Yes. Not a second exit. They had a exit. Yep.
They had an exit.
Hopefully you rolled some equity in that one, right? For our listeners, we talk about rolling equity and there you go. So that's the value of rolling equity. I mean, you get a much higher.
I had a tiny little bit.
Hey, a little bit of $100 million is still plenty. So.
Yes. And then you get 2 exits. And that's a beautiful story for somebody that never considered themselves an entrepreneur.
I mean, that's literally the conversation Casey and I are going to be having later tonight at dinner. So we're flying out another part of Texas with the business owner of a deal we're looking at. And, we've already met with them and trying to really work out the mechanics of what does rolling look like and kind of what the expectations look like there. So
and at the time, now that I've been running, they got acquired for 2.5 years. I've learned so much about this world, but going through that the first time, I didn't know any of this stuff. I didn't even really know it was called an acqui-hire until after we were through it, so
Gotcha.
There's so much to learn.
Well, that's actually a new word for me. I've never heard of that. So it's
really?
I hadn't heard of an acqui-hire.
See, in the software world, we use it all the time. So that I definitely have heard that many times. So then that was your first business, right? Then kind of carry us forward. What did that second one look like?
Yes. So when I left the penny order in 2019 and was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next and just stepping back, like while I had been running the agency, we had launched our own brand. So I mentioned we were running blogs for companies. And during that time I said, hey, the problem with this is like, we're building up these brands, these blogs and these followings for other businesses. And then if they ever leave us, we don't get any upside for that. So we ended up applying the people and the systems that we had built for our clients to our own brand. And we started a content site. It was a website for writers. It was called The Right Life. And it grew to be, I'd say, the biggest name in that niche over the next bunch of years. It was really, when I worked at the penny hoarder, it was a side project and I had 2 kids during that time. It was a very intense period of my life. So I was not working on that site during that time actively, but we had an editor who was just like running it and keeping it growing. And I wasn't even making any money on it. It was just like paying for itself to keep growing. But because of that, when I left the penny hoarder, I had this asset that was sitting there. And I asked myself, like, do I want to do something bigger with this? What do I want my future to look like? And so I took probably 9 months to play around with it. And I made a lot of SEO improvements because I found that to be fun and kind of experimented with it and then said, hey, I want to move on to something else. This feels like what I did like 10 years ago. So that was a second sale. I sold that site. It was an asset sale, so much different than my first one. So I sold it to someone else who just passed it over. I didn't go along with it. We had a small transition period, but because I am pretty process driven, everything was systemized and it was pretty easy to pass it over. So that was a mid 6-figure sale.
Nice. Exciting.
And so it's funny. You had the same epiphany I had whenever, I really got started in the web because I learned how to code and I was making websites for people. right? And then I remember I made this side project. It was called Wall Street Pros at the time, or I called it something else, but the guy rebranded to that. And I sold it, something I had made in like a 4-day period, right? Where it was all fake money, but real stock data, right? So you can kind of go in and go learn. I was a high schooler at the time. And I sold it to the guy that owned board.com. So if you were bored back in the early 2000s, you'd go to board.com and it was a link of a lot of websites. And guess what? 90% of the websites he linked to were his. So he's keeping all that traffic in the family. And I just remember selling him the website thinking like, man, I just made a killing off 4 days, right? And then he hired me to just make continual improvements to it. And he was making in 1 month what he bought it for me. So then I'm like, man, I should start creating my own stuff that I get to keep, right? And so that same thought process of how do I kind of move up the stack and kind of retain more of that? And so it's always interesting to see just, what's around that corner, right? You don't know until you get to see it.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So Lexi, how do you see now with knowing that you've been in the blogging, the writing and all that stuff? So how do you think AI is affecting those spaces? Are you starting to see it as maybe it just enhances it, or is it, you think it's just going to really ultimately take over?
It's such a different space than it was back then. I mean, totally different. And even down to like the ways that you get traffic are much different. I used to love the SEO space as a really reliable traffic generator, and it's not always the case anymore. So I think it's just really forced everybody to rethink how they run content businesses. And it's been a really hard year or two for content businesses because of all those changes. But right now, what I'm excited about is the opportunities for AI enhanced and like enabled businesses. I still think that there's a place for people who are writing, researching, fact checking and editing. And my personal belief is that the content businesses that have those pieces will come out on top, because eventually either the people notice that, a resource isn't good, or Google might find a way to crack down on some of those, low quality type sites. So I think it pays off to do it. At least you can have, and we use AI for little pieces of the process, but not to write the content. And it wouldn't work for our content. So we tell stories of entrepreneurs who have sold their businesses, and a lot of the stuff we're writing, it's never been written before. Like for AI, it has to exist already so you can repurpose it. And so something like us, there's a moat because you can't scrape it if it doesn't exist yet.
Right. No, so you're using it to enhance everything that you're doing. And I think that's
you got to have a slicker term. Okay. AI augmentation.
AI augmentation.
I just coined that one. I've not read or heard that one.
So going into the current business right now. So let's talk about what you're seeing. So just so the listeners know, so Lexi's group focuses on online businesses and providing the content and the data needed for a seller to be able to make better decisions, right?
Yes.
So what are you seeing in the market right now for the online businesses? What are you seeing with the people you're selling, and give us some feedback on that, what you're talking to your clients about.
And to add to that really quick, how did you end up getting from kind of exiting that 6-figure exit to deciding to go into that space? Because again, very different space.
Yeah. I mean, we're a media company at heart, and I like the idea of turning something that feels intimidating and inaccessible and making that accessible to people who can benefit from it. That's what I see our main job as. So to me, that's like the same thing I was doing before, the media company, right? It's like, how can you make something accessible and fun, and it's content that helps people? So in that way, it's very similar to what I was doing before, but yes, the space is different. And I personally had to learn a lot about M&A, because I still don't consider myself an expert in M&A. And we're not a brokerage, right? I don't do that. But I have learned a lot about it since we first started. And much of that is because I talk to a lot of founders who want to sell. So I am not selling businesses, but we talk to founders who want to sell. And then we write about the stories after they've sold, and we collect data for our M&A platform. And that's about sales that have already happened. Yeah. So a lot of people say to me, what's the market doing right now? And like, sometimes I talk to people about that, but I'm not seeing it because I am not actually selling businesses. But I can tell you kind of some of the things that I see from talking to a lot of founders that I want to sell.
Yes.
From founders who want to sell. One interesting piece is just that there's certainly a gap right now between what buyers are willing to pay and what sellers are willing to take. And that has stalled a lot of the people that I talk to from selling, because a lot of founders, their brain is still back in the glory days of 2020, 2021, when online businesses were selling like hotcakes and getting great multiples. And buyers, know that we're kind of past that now and we're in a different phase. And my personal opinion is
the leverage buyout has gotten a lot more expensive, right? I mean, financing
exactly,
is double what you used to pay.
That's a big piece of it. Yeah.
Leverage buyout don't make sense. Same thing we're seeing in commercial real estate. And so, trying to get seller expectations reset, right? Because the deal happens ultimately once both sides are aligned there.
So. Right.
Exactly. So I think that's been a challenge. And then also a lot of sellers or the founders I talked to, a lot of them have had a rough couple of years, especially content and e-commerce. So the four types of companies that we typically support are content or media, e-commerce, SaaS and software, and agencies. And I'd say, most of them except for software have had kind of a rough couple of years. It doesn't apply to everybody, certainly. And there are lots of people who are doing great, but I talked to a lot of people who have, they've had a rough couple of years. So they're trying to get their numbers up now so that they can sell at a place that feels good to them.
And you think is that just because we had the COVID push and then everything kind of fell off? Is that really why a lot of these guys you're talking to are struggling?
I think it's just been hard the last couple of years because people don't want to spend. Like, for example, if you have an agency and if you're a business that outsources things to an agency, when you want to keep your cash close, you're not going to spend money on those outsourced services as much, or maybe you don't just put as much money into marketing. And then, the content's kind of a different, totally different game. That space has been crushed by some of the Google changes and AI as well. And so buyers tend to see it as risky. And again, it depends so much on the specific business. Like I talked to a seller yesterday who's $1 million recurring revenue content business that has a great moat, and I'm sure he'll sell it for a lot of money. But just generally speaking, I think a lot of people have been on the struggle bus for the last year or so.
Yeah. So what, I guess for the listeners, right, what is the biggest, maybe let's start with biggest mistakes that you're seeing sellers do, right? Mm-hmm. Is it not having good books? Is it not having the right expectations, not having process? What are the biggest mistakes for those listeners that are potential sellers in the future that you see from the sellers that you're talking to?
Yeah. The biggest thing that we preach, and it's like our top number one thing, is think about this before you're ready to sell. Because if you decide you want to sell and then you need to sell soon, either because you're so stressed, you don't want to keep working, you don't have the energy to keep running the business, there's a health problem in your family, or you see the business starting to go down, you decide, oh God, I gotta get out. Those are all, like, you can sell at all those points, but if you think about it ahead of time and sell while the business is still increasing or still improving, you're going to have a much better exit. So the whole idea is just like, how can I get people to think about this before it hits them in the face and they have to learn about it? Right. So like some people come to us because they have to learn about it because they need to sell now, or they're desperate to sell now. You really want to be more proactive about it if you can, and think about it ahead of time, because all the things that you mentioned, there are so many. Once you understand how to increase the value of your business, you realize that most of them are not quick fixes. You've got to do them in advance. And sometimes it takes, 6 months or a year or even more to see the ROI on those changes. So if you're thinking about it ahead of time and even working ideally with like an advisor or someone who can help you understand how a buyer is going to look at the business, then you'll be able to sell it for a lot more.
Sometimes it's not even core to the business, right? Just like getting good books. You get more value on a sell if you have good books versus the guy that does it on paper, and you have a seller that's already their buyer that's discounting at 40% because they're going to question everything and have 5 times more work to validate. So,
yeah, one of the things I learned running startups is, we always had a data room. We always had, when we had a document or a file, we all saved those important things into our data room. So literally from day one, we would build a Dropbox folder or whatever, shared file. And then we would build out all the different like key things that someone's going to look through due diligence. And then throughout the year, we would just fill those folders up, so we were ready if somebody did come and talk to us, because we were always either raising more money, getting ready for another round, doing those things. And it really became a really good practice of how, when we've come into the M&A side, looking at some of these older companies we go through a process with, these aren't perfectly packaged, especially if you're going off market. Our acquisition that we did was an off market. We did not work through a broker. And so it wasn't like perfectly packaged. But, we've now taken the company over a year and we've started to build out those folders. And, I literally was having a call yesterday with an auditing firm because we want to start the audit process in 2025 for the 2024. Well, I didn't know. I didn't realize that, they're going to have to go back and audit the opening balance sheet. And so that right there takes 60 days. So instead of waiting to the end of the year, it's kind of like breaking it up. And so you kind of learn these things like, wow, so why would you audit? Well, you'd audit because if somebody taps you on the back and says, hey, we'd like to buy you, you want to be ready. Right. And I mean, I think those are those things that I think that all business owners, not necessarily an audit, but these kind of mindsets of having that package ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we see a lot of founders who have sold, they understand these concepts and they apply it to their second business, even doing little things like, if you use a Drive folder in Google Drive, you're making sure that you've set it up in a way that's you can easily pass it on to the next person. Because I've made that mistake before where I couldn't pass it on, little things like that. If you've gone through it once, you think about those things. So our goal is to just help founders who, haven't had that experience so they can kind of have some of those insights their first time around.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just funny because you're so deep in starting and, operational stuff and you kind of forget all the other stuff, right? And that stuff is equally important. I mean, we were finalists for Entrepreneur of the Year and it was just almost comical because we had to whip out a whiteboard just to explain our company and the organization and the entities just because it was all one big mess at the beginning. And now we're, normalizing it and separating it all out and it creates complexity, right? And we obviously weren't selling, but same concept, a potential buyer, you don't want to have to do that with a potential buyer where let me whiteboard what all these things are and why you should trust this. And so,
but you're not going to get the multiple, right? You're not going to get what you're looking for. So Lexi, where do you see the trades right now for, these online businesses? I take it that you're looking at people are buying on a recurring revenue and there's a multiple typically tied to that is what you're talking to them about.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on what type of business because e-com, content agencies, and SaaS all have drastically different multiples. And some of those are recurring and some of them aren't. Like I was just mentioned, an owner of a content business, many content businesses are not recurring revenue, but the one I was talking to yesterday was. So like if you can achieve that, then that is going to, help you push up your multiple, of course. So it really depends on the type of business and sometimes even the vertical and certainly the size as well. So of course, like the bigger the business, the better multiples you're going to get because it opens up a different type of buyer.
Yeah. But in your space, so, we focus on the lower middle market, but, preferably kind of more blue collar oriented. All that is driven on multiples of EBITDA, right? 3-4x, kind of in that range. In your space, is it multiples of revenue? Is it multiples of, what are they actually looking for? And then, for the listeners, just what are the ranges you're typically seeing? And then I'll add one more question to that. I want to add you ask a lot of questions. Favorite businesses come your way that you're like, this is a pretty cool business. And
I see quite a few of those where I'm like, do not buy this. Do not buy this. But to answer your question around multiples, what was the first question you asked? I've lost it now.
Is it multiple of revenue, multiple of earnings? I mean,
profit is still the most important part. And actually that's a huge piece that I educate founders on like every single day. It is like I've talked to a founder last week who has a great business. They're bringing in like $1 million in revenue, but she's turning a profit. And it was hard for her to understand like how that this isn't seen as incredibly valuable to someone. And if she gets the right strategic buyer, obviously, then it could sell for a good sum of money because they built up an audience and there's money coming in the door, but just having people understand that the profit and a lot of folks that I talk to, they're calculating SDE, so seller's discretionary earnings, or it might be EBITDA for a bigger business. But I often just call it profit because people understand that. It's like, how much are you taking home? And that needs to be, the more you can improve that, then the more you're going to get paid for your business. So in terms of the multiples, I would say that's usually the first metric that a multiple might be based on. But there are some businesses that are based on a multiple of revenue. And I mean, I've heard even for SaaS businesses, I believe, and by the way, I'm not a valuations expert. I usually send people to like a broker to do that.
Sure.
But I've heard people say for software, for example, or for SaaS, that you might be valued on EBITDA up to $1 million, but then above $1 million in revenue, maybe the multiple switches over to revenue. So
interesting.
There are different people who do it in different ways.
Okay. And in favorite business you've seen so far kind of come across?
Oh gosh, we put a few of these into First Look, which is our we have a newsletter for buyers that features founders that I talk to who want to sell, who have not listed the business yet. So a few of these businesses have gone into First Look, and these are ones where I'm like, all right, tell my husband, like, do not let me buy this business. Some of them, I mean, I think anything with recurring revenue is always really interesting. There is a woman, I don't want to be too specific about it. Actually, I'm trying to think if I can give an example that's not specific. Well, here's another one is I also talk to a lot of women who are selling, and that's like an underserved population. There aren't a lot of women in the M&A space. So sometimes I think it's refreshing for them to have a woman to talk to about this stuff. So like a lot of the examples I'm giving are women because we serve a lot of female business owners. But there was one when I talked to who had an e-commerce company where she had the product, it was like a kitchen product, and it's very unique and like really well designed because she's into design and she focused a lot on the aesthetics of the product, but she wasn't great at like marketing or selling. And like, I looked at that and I was like, oh, I mean, I'm good at marketing. That's kind of what I consider to be one of my strengths. So I look at that and I'm like, oh man, if you just partner with a marketing person, you sell to a marketing person, you've done all the hard work of creating a great product and making sure that can keep getting made. Then that would be, a great opportunity for the right buyer.
Got it. And I don't even know if I'd call that even e-com. So you got to have that real world component of it too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, she's selling a house good online. So that's
exciting. So talk to me real quick, just in regards to your company right now. So if somebody was interested in your services, what are the things that you would go through? Like, talk to us about the business, how like someone go online and how do you help in a lot of ways?
Our main product is our M&A data platform. We call it They Got Acquired Data. And it does two primary things. It can help you pull comps or see other businesses that are like the one that you either want to buy or sell. And obviously comps are hard to find for private transactions generally. But like, for example, we just had a user come into the platform who wanted to buy a community business, like an online community. And that's a very specific niche. And he was having a hard time finding other similar businesses that he could use to model like an offer. So he came into our platform, he pulled a list of online community companies that had sold in the last 5 years, and he used that to craft his offer and justify his offer to the company that he wanted to buy.
Oh, wow.
So comps is one thing. And the other piece is we don't anonymize our data. So basically our database, it features deals that have happened in the last 5 years. Our sweet spot is between $100,000 and $50 million in terms of the size of the deal. So this is it's smaller than what a lot of other platforms track. And also it's only online businesses. So we don't do like Main Street brick and mortar businesses. But because we collect all of these deals that have happened and we don't anonymize the data, we can slice and dice it in lots of different ways. So we can see who the buyers are. So we have like a cross section of the data that shows who are the buyers that have been buying lots of SaaS companies or lots of e-commerce or whatever it is in the last few years. And if a founder comes to us and wants to, or sometimes we work with M&A advisors as well, who need to find buyers for their clients and they want to add more buyers to the pool, they can do a search that says, hey, what buyers have bought this type of business in the last few years, so that we can reach out and then contact them. We have contact information in the platform as well.
Yeah,
so
instead of the big focus on founders, I mean, there's definitely value there for buyers, right? You understand what's happening in my niches that I'm focusing on, or
absolutely,
who I want to go, who's been acquired that I want to go acquire their parent company. I mean, there's a lot of ways to kind of play with that. And so,
yeah, we've had a lot of interest, more than I expected really from buyers, because I haven't really focused on buyers as a user segment for us. We have a free newsletter online. It's theyGotAcquired.com/newsletter. And most of the people who read that are founders, but we also have some buyers and we have some like investors on there as well. But because of that, I was focusing more on the founder side, but it's been interesting to see a lot of
actually
buyers.
Believe if you mine it, I'm willing to bet the buyer side will be the more valuable, profitable side of that.
It might be.
I'll come back to me in 2 years. Let me know how that pans out. But I just, like founders are founders, right? I mean, there's a mix of them. Buyers are very strategic typically, right? They have a plan. They're willing to spend money to accomplish that plan. And so they're much more, willing to spend the money, right? And they're a lot more serious. Whereas buyers, I'm sure you kind of have the mix. You have the guys that really want to sell and the guys that, it's kind of it's a pipe dream, right? Like, yeah, I'll sell if somebody overpays me significantly, but they're not really there to complete the transaction.
Right. Buyers also typically understand the value of the data and the insights because they know how hard it is to get. So, and they've been in this for a while. And so, yeah, it's typically the value prop is more obvious to them.
So what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned in this business so far?
About selling a business or running?
No, just about you running your business.
It was a real transition for me. Before doing this, I was running a team of 60 within the previous company I was working at. And now I'm starting over again with a small bootstrapped team of contractors. And I think I underestimated that would be challenging to start over again. Like it'd been a while since I did that, started from scratch. But it's been a lot of fun. And I think it's made me rethink, what do I want out of this business? My dream, what sounds appealing to me is I don't want to build a massive company with tons of employees. I'm really interested in the, high revenue, low headcount type of businesses. Okay. So that's what we're going after. And I believe in having a business support your life rather than the other way around. So I build with that in mind as well.
Got it. And you said you have 2 kids, right?
I do. Yep.
Oh yeah. So you also have some other focuses that are out there as well, enjoying that.
Yeah.
She said it earlier. They were limiting her whenever she was at the penny hoarder.
Yeah. Probably very young.
Yeah. I said it was an intense few years, which is true. I believe but they're older now.
Yeah. It's always nice, So one of the things we want to do for our listeners is jump into our rocket round. All right. So in their rocket round, we're going to go through and ask Lexi some questions, 3 questions, so we can get to know her better. And so Lexi, if you're good with it, I'm going to go ahead and fire the first question at you. So what do you like to do in your free time?
I like to be outside. Before this call, I volunteer with the trail group here in town, and we were in a hiking town. So I was out scoping out some new trails that we're building this morning, but I like to be outside.
Oh, nice.
All right. Awesome. All right, next question. Most memorable moment in your business journey?
In this business, I think I could point to a couple of times when we helped founders sell. And even I remember the first founder that I had done a call with and helped connect him to a broker. And when he sold his business and got in touch with me and told me that he had sold, and it was partly because of, the chat that we had. And he didn't even realize, honestly, that it was possible before he started following us. Those are the ones that always feel really special to me. So I'll certainly remember people like that and as they close on their own wins.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, most people don't really know what's out there. So
yeah, and it's going to be one of their biggest things that they've done in their life, right? And so you get to assist them in that process, which is huge. Mm-hmm. Yeah, lots of karma reward there.
The thing that they're going to be on a podcast telling people about and telling their grandkids about. So,
all right. So last question: what is your favorite tool or resource?
I'm in Airtable every day now, so I'll say Airtable. It's a souped up version of Google Sheets, but it's where we house all of our data. And I love now they have a feature where you can use AI to write some scripts that will help you do more advanced manipulation of the data. And I found that to be super helpful. There's so many things now that you can do on your own that I could never have done 10 years ago running an online business. It's cool. It's really fun.
You're the second person that said Airtable.
No, Airtable's got
2 weeks.
Plenty of, it's just it's powerful, right? It's a good way to stay organized. And it's that, because, my background is software, so I'm comfortable building databases and, customizing Excel, all that. But there's that layer of people that are technical enough, but don't know how to do that. And so it really starts to bridge that gap and gets more and more people able to consolidate and organize. And it's pretty slick. So I've been.
Yeah. My husband's a Google Sheets developer expert. He teaches people how to use Google Sheets. So he does most of our home stuff's all in Sheets, and he can do all these fancy scripts in Sheets to do anything we need. But for me, I can't do that stuff unless I have AI to help me. So for me, being an Airtable is often a better solution.
Awesome.
That is great.
Perfect. Well, Lexi, thanks for being on the show. How can people get a hold of you?
We're at theygotakquired.com/newsletter. And I'm on LinkedIn, Alexis Grant. and check out our data product. It's at data.theyGotAcquired.com.
Perfect. And we'll put all those in the show notes for those listeners. So I guess we'll call it a wrap. Lexi, thank you very much.
Lexi, great talking with you. Welcome. Thank you for listening to the M&A Launchpad Podcast. If you've enjoyed today's podcast and would like to support us, please leave us a rating and a review after you listen. I'm Casey Minshew, and I look forward to talking with you next week.